أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء وخاتم المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا بالقاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين واللعنة الدائمة الباقية لأعدائهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ألف لام ميم ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with this month, which is the month of Quran, with the opportunity to look at the Quran. We have been seizing this moment to look at Surah Rahman. The almost more than half of the surah basically deals with the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then after talking about everything that we looked in the earlier discussions, after about 9 sessions, all of a sudden Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings this issue of mortality of human beings. That you are going to die. And this was just to make us realize that yes, the dunya is for us, but remember, this is not your final destination. This is just a temporary phase of your life. And you have to use this dunya for the akhirah. I think the connection between the dunya and akhirah is that akhirah is not an entity, unconnected to the dunya. You can't have akhirah without dunya. So we have to seize the moment here. And this is the place where we will build our akhirah. And the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, after talking about all different things that He gave us in the list of the blessings, was the issue of realizing that all these things are there, but Allah wanted to warn us that do not consider this to be your final abode. This is just a temporary phase. Take whatever you can in order to improve your akhirah. And that is done by 2 methods. When we talk about what is known as reformation in Islam, basically it has to do with the positive and negative method. When we talk about islah or tarbiyat, to reform a person or to train a person to become better. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this surah has used both methods. What we saw yesterday was basically the negative point of it, where He is warning us that those who are evil doers, this is how I'm going to deal with them. So make sure you are not part of that group. Now, besides that warning process, there is another method, and that is known as basharat. If you look at the process, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns us as well as gives us hope. The Prophet in many places in the Quran has been described as Bashiran wa Nadhira. He's a Bashir as well as Nadhir. Bashir means somebody who gives good news, that if you follow me, if you believe in me, and follow the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Jannah is the end. And if you disbelieve, and if you disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Jahannam would be the end. So there is Basharat on one side, Nadharat on the other side. So he is Bashir and Nadhir. And Allah uses both methods. We looked at the warning yesterday, and the rest of the surah basically is talking about the positive side of it, the Basharat that He gives. That if you use the blessings that I'm giving to you, in order to build your akhirah, then I give you the good news. And that's where the terms start. The ayat number 46, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلِمَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ جَنَّتَانِ. For the person who fears the maqam of his Lord, he shall have 2 gardens. Remember we talked about Mashriqain, Maghribain. Let me make it more complicated now. Even Alif noon after a noun is also a dual. It all depends on how the wordings have been put. And here also you see Jannatan. Jannah, the literal meaning would be garden. And so here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلِمَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ Jannatan, the person who fears the status of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he shall have two gardens. Now, the term status or maqam has been highlighted there because there is discussion among the mufassirin, what does it mean? One is that, maqam is the place where you stand up. Maqama rabbihi would also refer, number one tafsir says that a person who fears the moment where he will be face to face with Allah. Of course, not that Allah will be there on the other side of you. It means is that face to face with the judgment that Allah is going to give on that day. So one is that liman khafa maqama rabbihi means to fear that moment and day where we will be presented to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He will be the judge and we will be the other side of the process of judgment. And so somebody who has that kind of khawf, that is a person who will have successful in the hereafter. The second meaning of maqam is basically is in the same meaning as we use, for example, in Urdu or Farsi, maybe even Gujarati. That liman khafa maqama rabbihi means the person who fears the status of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if that fear is there, that fear is going to force that person to act in the right way. And if he acts in the right way, he will have Jannatan. And so this is the second explanation of maqam, is that we are talking about the all-knowing quality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nothing is hidden from Him. He knows everything. And when you go in presence of a judge who doesn't even need witnesses. Remember yesterday we looked at the ayat which says the day when no person will be asked, means the mouths would be sealed and the limbs will be testifying. So when you go into presence of a judge, if you keep that aspect of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that maqam of Allah in mind, that He is all aware, all seeing, all knowing, nothing can be hidden from Him, then that khawf itself is going to be a reforming element in our life. Let me go back to the earlier ayat where we talked about the name Ar-Rahman, that in a couple of places, especially in Surah Yasin, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala combines the two contradictions. Khashiya Ar-Rahman means the person who fears the merciful God. Now on one hand we are talking about Rahman who is merciful, on the other hand we are saying fearing Him. And that khawf basically is the khawf of the status of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Somebody who is all-knowing, all-seeing, all-aware. If you have that maqam of Allah in the mind, that creates kind of khawf in our hearts, a positive khawf which will prevent us from committing sins. Let me just repeat here an example that we hear sometimes from children. Children in their innocence teach many things to us as adults. In one of the seminars many years ago, more than 15, one of the teachers was describing a situation where she had given an assignment to the students. And these are very small children. She gave them something and they said, you go home, find the spot where you can hide this, where nobody can see or know about it. And next day or the next week when they had the madrasa, everybody came with all different answers. Children would have found many things, whether under the pillow, under the mattress, behind the cupboard or whatever. But there was one child who stood up and he told the teacher that I couldn't find a place where Allah would not be able to see it. That age of innocence and that awareness, that's what we need when we become baligh. And if we have that maqam of Rabb on that level, that he cannot be, away from anything, he is there, then that itself creates that khawf, which becomes a positive element in our life. And the third, dimension, which is very similar to the second one, some of the Mufassirin say it refers to the status of rububiyyat, and that's why the term Rabb has come there, maqam rabbihi. And even the term Rabb is used again and again in this surah, especially in the ayat فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ, because rububiyyat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is universal. And especially if you look at the list of blessings that He has talked about from the heavens to the earth, going back and forth, maybe that was an indication that Allah's rububiyyat is not confined to one area, one place. He is Rabbul Alameen. Unfortunately, some people even get confused with that, whether He's Rabbul Al. Well, He is Rabbul Alameen who never becomes retired. It's not that other will take His place and be called Rabbul Alameen. He is Rabbul Alameen and nobody else. And so that status of rububiyyat has to be also kept in mind. And if that is there, then the khawf, the element of khawf would be there, which will be a positive element in our life. Jannatan, what does it refer to? When we look at this issue, two gardens. Does it refer to, some of the Mufassirin say, well, because this whole surah is addressing jinn and ins, so the jinnat will have a different garden, the ins will have a different garden. So we are stuck with them, whether in dunya, but they will be coexisting with us. They also go through the same process. They have mu'mineen, they are kafirin, they are good doers, they are bad people among them, and they also will go through the process of questioning and everything. But however, that's not really a view which is that much acceptable by the many Mufassirin. One important difference between Jannatan, two gardens, what does it refer to? It's actually not two physical gardens. One explanation is that people will be rewarded according to their status. Those who really look for river of honey and milk, that's what they will get. But there are others who have elevated themselves to the level where for them the material blessings of Jannah really are not their objective. They are looking for the ridwan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the pleasure and the ridha of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's really and so that's where two Jannahs are being separated in that way, that some will get a garden which is full with material and physical good things for their good deeds, but there will be others who will get actually more than that, and that they will get this qurb of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not in a physical sense, but that ridwan, this sense that they are among those with whom Allah is more pleased than the others. And there are different ayat, actually I will come to that later on. One is based on another ayat, that Jannatan refers to one Jannat will be which is earned by our good deeds, and the extra will be the bonus that Allah gives to us. That also a plausible thought. There are ayat referring to that, and there is one tafsir where that refers to the iman and amal. Both are of different levels, and the reward would be different, and therefore the concept of two gardens refers to that. As far as the rizwan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is concerned, this is in many ayat Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the Jannah and the things in the Jannah. Then at the end He says وَرِضْوَانٌ, and the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that is always singled out. There is one ayat in Surah Tawbah, ayat number 72, we're talking about the scenery of Jannat, where Allah says, وَمَسَاكِنٌ طَيِّبًا فِي جَنَّاتِ عَدْنٍ, means good houses in perpetual gardens. And then he ends by saying, وَرِضْوَانٌ مِنَ اللَّهِ أَكْبَرُ, and the ridwan and pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, akbar, this is greater than all the good things that you see in the Jannah. So there is this concept of, a superior level of reward for those who really look for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Maybe that becomes more clear if we go to the statement of Amir al-Mu'mineen when he says, Salawat, where he says people worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for three reasons. There are some who worship Him because they fear Jahannam. And so this is Ibadatul Abid. Amir al-Mu'mineen, terms it as the worship of the slaves. And then there are others who actually worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in desire for Jannat. It's not fear of Jahannam, but it's more desire for good things in Jannat. And this is where Amir al-Mu'mineen says this is Ibadatul Tujjar. This is the Ibadat of those who are merchants. They always look for what is in it for me. And this is very common, even in religious circles you hear that. What do I get at the end? And then Amir al-Mu'mineen says, but there are some people who do not worship Him because they are afraid of Jahannam, or they have this love for Jannat. They worship Him because they consider Him worthy of worshipping. And this is known as Ibadatul Ahrar. This is the worship of those who are truly free from the shackles of this dunya and the desire and the fear. And so it doesn't mean that the other two categories of ibadats are batil. Sometimes, I see people condemning. No, everybody has different levels. And they worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from a different angle. And it's okay, there's no problem. The difference would be in the darajat in the Jannah. And this is what we see when we look at the concept of Ridwan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even in Dua Kumail, the climax of Dua Kumail is when Amir al-Mu'mineen says, you have confessed to the sins, acknowledge that you are worthy of being punished by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is no excuse, no protest can be made against Allah's judgment. But then at the end, Ali says, talk to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the language of love, where you say to Allah, I accept that I deserve Jahannam. You are just in what you have done, the decision that you have made, and I don't protest against it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I still used to say, La ilaha illallah. I still used to put my forehead on the ground for you. I can bear this azab for everything, but I can still then not bear the distance which is there because you put me in Jahannam. That distance in a physical sense, that bu'ud between me and you, by going with the mushrikeen and the kafirin, this is not bearable. And this is the language of love that Ali is talking about. And that's where the concept of Ridwanullah comes in. And so after that, if we can get that kind of khawf, that indeed is a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we are told, Allah asks this question, فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ, which of your Lord's bounties will you both deny? And the response from our sixth Imam as taught by him is, لَا بِشَيْءٍ مِّنْ آلَائِكَ رَبِّ أُكَذِّبْ, none of your bounties, my Lord, do I deny. The next ayat, which is continuing this concept of the Jannat, the Jannatan, the two gardens. There is one more description about it. Zawata Afnan, means both the gardens that will be given to the person who fears Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It will have, abundance in branches. Now garden, the concept of garden is trees. You can't have, garden without trees. And so one meaning of the word afnan would be abundance in branches of that tree. Another tafsir basically given about the meaning of the word afnan is basically abundance in a variety of things in these two gardens. So either one you take, or you can take even both. As long as you reach there, it doesn't really matter. And then again after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeats the words, فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ. Our response is, لَا بِشَيْءٍ مِّنْ آلَائِكَ رَبِّي أُكَذِّبُ. Further on, and this is, although it's one thing he's describing in bits and pieces, but he's interjecting these words, making us, realize that do not ever forget the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even in the things which might seem negative, but if you really look at it, eventually it becomes a positive thing for you. فِيهَا عَيْنَانِ تَجْرِيَانِ. In those gardens that Allah will bless the people who fear Him, there will be two streams flowing, تَجْرِيَانِ. This could even refer to Salsabil and Tasneem. These are the two names of the streams given in other ayat of the Quran. Remember these names. It might come in one of the questions on Friday, on our last quiz. Salsabil and Tasneem. فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ. The response is لَا بِشَيْءٍ مِّنْ آلَائِكَ رَبِّي أُكَذِّبُ. Continuing with the description of the Jannat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then says, فِيهِمَا مِنْ كُلِّ فَاكِهَةٍ زَوْجَانِ. In both the gardens, there will be pairs of every fruit. Now, which kind of fruits we will have in Jannah, we don't know. It could be similar to what we have in this dunya, and even more than that. But these examples are there. Sometimes I remember one of the teachers in Qom, during my early days, he was giving an example, and remember this, we're talking about Iran, and this individual who was teaching had not gone outside of Iran. So he said, many of these fakiha, the fruits about Jannah described in the scenery of the verses of Quran, they are unknown to us. We don't know really. And the example he gave, which actually made me laugh, says, we hear in India there is something known as ambe. Aam in Farsi they call it ambe. He said, we hear about it. It's very delicious, mango. It's a very delicious food, but we never seen it. And for us, these fruits of Jannah is like what we hear about this ambe in Hind. And so, there are many, many things which will be there. We don't know the details, but be assured it's going to be better than what we have in this dunya. And after that again, the same statement comes in, فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ لَا بِشَيْءٍ مِّنْ آلَائِكَ رَبِّي أُكَذِّبُ. Further on, after talking about the Jannatan, the place, now he's talking about certain things which we are familiar with it. There are in many, many surahs, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about it. And this is مُتَّكِئِينَ عَلَى فُرُشٍ بَطَائِنُهَا مِنْ إِسْتَبْرَقٍ وَجَنَى الْجَنَّتَيْنِ دَانٍ. That they will be reclining. The people who are on maqam khawf, who have attained that level, they will have the Jannatan, they will have, after the scenery, he says, they will be reclining on beds. Now, in some places, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the term ara'ik, muttaqeena ala ara'ik, which means the couches. This is one more part of it. They will be reclining on the beds, whose lining would be made from green silk. Just trying to, bring us closer to the comfortable things that we are familiar with in this dunya. And not only that, even though you will be, inshallah, reclining on the couches or the bad, just think about the scenery. Jannal Jannatain done. Even then, the fruits of the two gardens will be close by. Very handy. You don't have to really go and, whether we'll have volunteers or not, we'll talk about it, tomorrow, inshallah. فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ. And the response again is لا بشيء من آلائك ربي أكذب. صلوات Inshallah, we'll continue with the tafsir, inshallah, tomorrow, and on Friday. We'll end with the surah on Friday night. But at the moment, let me just emphasize on this point that when we look at this situation in dunya, many times, this example that we see here is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about the blessings. And then He talked about Jahannam. And now He's talking about Jannat. We had to realize that even sometimes in things which seem to be negative, there's a positive element in that also. The way we use this term in English, that something which looks bad, but there is a blessing in disguise for us. If you look at the situation, let me go to the life of our seventh Imam, Imam Musa al-Kazim alayhi salatu wassalam. But it's amazing that when he was put in prison by Harun, when a person is in prison, what do we pray? Well, we're complaining to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala against the zulm done to us, But it's amazing that in one of his du'as, which is narrated for us, he thanks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, "Oh Allah, I always looked for an opportunity where I could sit down and do your ibadat and worship you without any disturbance. I thank you for this opportunity you have given to me." He changes a negative, seemingly a negative thing, into a positive, where he considers to be worthy of thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it. And this is where we have to realize that we sometimes, we go through difficult stages in life, but we have to turn it around and look at the positive in it and try to improve our situation. And so when we talk about the concept of tarbiyat that Quran is giving to us, there is basharat as well as the process of warning. And when it comes to the warning, it might seem negative, but that warning itself is actually a blessing that we can learn our lessons from it and really reform ourselves. Concluding with the example that I quoted on the Majlis on Monday about our attachment to the dunya. Remember the example I quoted from my late father about the fly which sits on the sugar versus a fly which sits on the honey. One is basically sucked in, cannot come out, while in other case, basically the fly is able to fly away after it had taken whatever it wanted from the sweetness from the sugar. I just wanted to translate that in the context of individual personalities. If you look at these events of Karbala, we had two individuals who were on the same position. Maybe the status was slightly different, but both were officers, senior officers in the army of Yazid. One was Hur and one was Amr ibn Sa'ad. Both had knowledge about Imam Hussain alayhi salam. Both realized that he is on the truth. And this is no denial. Even when it comes to Umar ibn Sa'ad, he was not somebody who was ignorant. He knew about it. And the moment of choice comes on Shab-e Ashur, when Shimr Mal'un comes in. Because even Amr ibn Sa'd wanted to get out of this situation so it doesn't end to a war where he would have to kill Imam Hussein alayhi salam. But then Shamir basically did the fitna, poisoned the mind of Ibn Ziyad, and he is sent on Shab Ashur with the letter addressed to Umar ibn Sa'd that you have to complete the task given to you. If you can't, hand over the command to Shimr. And this is the moment of choice for Amr ibn Sa'd. It is the same night now even Hur becomes sure that the battle is going to take place. Before that, there was still hope that things might end up in peace or just truce, and Imam Hussein alayhi salam will not be killed. But when that moment comes in, both of them in their own position had to make the choice. Are they going to be with Yazid or with Imam Hussein alayhi salam? And that is where this attachment to the dunya comes in. The family of Amr ibn Sa'd have quoted his lines of poetry on Shab Ashur, where he says that I know in killing Hussein, Jahannam is guaranteed for me. وَلَكِنْ مُلْكُ الرَّعْيِ قُرَّةُ عَيْنٍ. This is one line from that, where he says, but the governorship of the city of Rai, which has been promised to me by Ibn Ziyad, is the apple of my eyes. I cannot, detach myself from it. So he became like the fly which was sitting on the honey, could not detach himself from it. Whereas Hur, a commander of cavalry force with 1,000 horsemen under his command, so he also has a status there, and definitely he would have been, promoted and rewarded even more. But then he realized that this dunya is transient in nature; it's not forever. To choose between the dunya and the akhirah, and so the path of akhirah goes with Hussein ibn Ali. And so he was able, like the fly sitting on the sugar, he was able to fly away, live all these things, and join Imam Hussein alayhi salam. So it's not really the dunya which is a problem for us, even not the hubb dunya. It is just the level of attachment. We are allowed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to own it, to become master and malik of it, but not the slave of this dunya. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.